Given this conference's theme is Space for All, is that an accurate reflection of what's going on, or are we seeing the formation of two separate blocks of Western space countries, as well as Russia and China, and what can be done if that is the case to enable that real Space for All vision? Thanks.
We'd like to take that one.
I have spoken to Mr. Borisov, told him that I look forward to seeing him at the first opportunity. With regard to this space conference, I can't answer that question. You would have to get that from someone that organized the conference.
Next up. And please keep your questions specific to one person on the panel.
Thanks, Michael. Irene Fox with Aviation Week, maybe for Mr. Osbacher, if you could also address the issue, Europe has had a different relationship with China than the United States and has been able to be a bridge. China also is not here this year. In light of trying to be inclusive, which I think Europe is clearly a leader in that, how do you balance between maintaining ties with countries and still acknowledging the political realities? And maybe if you can specifically address how the evolving relationship with Europe and Russia might affect the ongoing relationship that you've had with China. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. These are, of course, the delicate political questions. By the way, I do think that China is here. At least I've seen China receiving an award this morning, representatives from the Chinese National Space Agency. So China is represented, maybe not at the very top level. But as regards the cooperation we have, ESA has cooperations with China. We have a few, especially on the science domain. It was a big project called Dragon, where we have teams working Earth observation in particular, using Chinese data, using European data for climate change. Climate change, I think, is affecting every single country here. Nobody can afford to be not participating, because this is something where we need international efforts. It's one example. Certainly the cooperation along topics like climate change, like sustainability, are the ones that are a good kernel, because at the end of the day there's one planet, and the planet, we cannot divide the air that goes around the planet into countries or blocks. This is simply impossible. So I think climate change or Earth observation is a domain where you have to, just like with on the space station. On the space station, if you're depending on each other's capabilities, you have to rely on each other. So yes, we maintain these cooperations, and that is ongoing as we had it before. I think this is certainly fair to say. Of course, with Russia, and this is also very well known, we have been terminating the cooperation on ExoMars based on decisions by my member states. Similarly, on Kourou, the engineers of Roscosmos walked away from Kourou, meaning that we cannot launch Soyuz rockets anymore from there, meaning that we do need a new launch policy, or a new to ensure that access to space is guaranteed with all means. Of course, we have the Ariane 6 rocket coming up, we have Vega C just launched at the maiden flight just in July, but we do need to make sure that we can launch our satellites independently, or we have this guaranteed access to space, so this is crucial.
Thank you, Joseph. Next question, in the back there.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Megan from Geospatial World. My question is to Dr. Somnath. So, sir, I have two questions. One is about is there any concrete plan for the development or the mentoring of the startups? And the second one is about funding. The Indian startups are facing a lot of funding issues. We see environment is yet to take off in India. It's not yet developed like the European or the US countries. So from the ISRO side, is there any program for the funding of the Indian startup? Not just from the private sector, which you talked about in your presentation. Thank you.
The first part is about the mentoring part. Of course, that is being taken care by the organizations which I already explained. In space, we enable that part of mentoring through the available technology, support, infrastructure in Indian space ecosystem. But coming to funding, there is enough of funds. I think the people who knows startups ecosystem realizes that there are enough funds. The only issue is enough of ideas. Once you have an idea that can be converted to a business opportunity, there are enough funds in India. That is very, very clear, and we have shown it to many of those startups how to connect with the support system that are available. But we are not thinking about a mechanism by which government funds are directed to the startups. I think that such an opportunity doesn't exist because we have realized that there is in the private environment itself there are enough funds, and fund of funds are also available, and we have created a mechanism by which that engagement can really happen, and it's actually happening. I think some of the recent events of fundraising by rocket industries really indicate that they are not short of funds.
Thank you, Chairman. We're going to move on to the next question here in the room. Sir?
Thank you. This question also for Chairman Sundar. It's about the India's space policy, or rather why, despite having launched the first rocket into space from India in 1963, why India still doesn't have that. But first, can I congratulate you, sir, becoming chairman. It's something that we need younger chairman in this room. Congratulations. I saw your excitement and genuine and sincere desire for the private sector in India to make some headway. The thing that's holding you back is the absence of the space policy, and then can come the space activities bill. It's quite slow, very frustrating, and I'm sure you share that frustration as well. But can you share with us what it is that you've done to help promote and progress and get to that point sooner rather than later? And when do you think, I think back to an interview I heard you in February of this year, when you were anticipating it to be released, the new space policy by February. When do you think it will actually be realized?
Okay, the first thing I would like to remove from your mind, the doubt that a policy is hindering in any way the activities in space sector. Absolutely not. We were able to move with whatever support system required for new actors to come into space sector. We have handed over our industry production of our PSLV to industries, which is one of the goals. We have deregularized the imaging access to the private sector. That's already done. We are working on the FDA policy, which is already on. Wherever there are suggestions coming for FDA policy, it's being encouraged. So all elements of that space policy which is yet to come are already on. So absolutely there is no stoppage of any activities on one of policy. But I agree with you. Legal activities or governmental legal legislation is a very painstaking, slow process. So we agree to that and then wait for that to come out. I have completed my job, so we wait for that to happen.
Can you suggest a date? When do you think it will actually
No, that's not in my purview to suggest any dates for governmental regulation, and I am not part of that activity.
Thank you.
Next question. Redford.
My question is for Mr. Yamakawa. The HTV-X for lunar resupply. Could you provide some more details on the program and perhaps upcoming milestones for it?
Well, HTV-X is based on past HTV, which provided cargo transportation capability from the ground to the International Space Station. And every launch was successful, no failure. And then based on that technology, we will upgrade HTV to HTV-X. And more concretely speaking, we will increase the capability of mass, increase the mass which we can transport to first to the International Space Station and then further to the moon. So that's the current plan, and right now we're working very hard to realize that requirement. That's the current status. And also we will, not only in terms of mass, but also the dimension of the cargo will be increased. That's the current situation.
Thank you, Hiroshi. Appreciate the answer. We'll go to the next question here. My friend.
I'm not sure if this is appropriate or not, but I want to continue from that last question. So, with the current change and some news event in the space industry and the socio-political landscape that affect the ESA to some extent or to some degree, what is your perspective on the concept of ESA-led international manned space launch capability that is also reusable and might be sustainable in long term, apart from the flagship spacecraft like the current Orion? I'm referring to the Hermes concept in the past. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions on human exploration and reusable spacecraft. We have a space rider in development, as you might know. We have co-funding of, or the last tranche of funding of space rider on the ministerial conference right now. We plan to fly Space Rider in 24-25, and that will be the first reusable vehicle for transportation, in this case of cargo of mass into space. It's of course not human-rated. The next question, of course, is how do we go about human-rated? This is, I think, at the core of your question. There, I cannot give you the answer today, but I can tell you that I have been asked by my member states and by Mr. Macron at the Space Summit in February to investigate options and come back to the member states with proposals and options at the end of next year at the next Space Summit. And there we're working at the moment pretty hard with a number of high-level advisors, not from the space community, but people representing different levels of society, economists, artists, explorers, also people from politics, to really ask them the view of what they think, what Europe should do in human exploration medium to long term. And of course this opinion will then be given to our member states. They will make decisions, and this is a process that we will start actually by the end of this month with the first meeting, and this will go for about a year's time and culminate in a space summit at the end of next year.
Thank you, Joseph. I appreciate that answer. We're going to go to the next question right up here in the front.
Thanks, Michael. Joey Riley, Reuters. I have one quick question for Chairman Somnath. Do you see any opportunities for India in collaborating with China on its moon program? And kind of a similar question to pose to Administrator Nelson. China and NASA and allies are targeting similar regions on the moon for moon landings. Do you see any potential opportunities there for coordination, and should current rules for collaborating with China change as that date nears? Thanks.
Right now we have a very active moon program. We have launched Chandrayaan-2 last. We made a certain last minute anomaly. Our activity today is to continue with that program and achieve the same in Chandrayaan-3. And we are getting ready for that. The craft is completed and we are waiting for a right opportunity. And for that we are already collaborating with NASA, and with their great support we are going to go to achieve that mission. Then we have the next mission identified, which is called the LUPEX-1, and which is with JAXA, and we are working on a lander demonstration through that program and also posting scientific instruments. And our program has been defined up to that now. Of course, your question is much more deeper in meaning than the Chandrayaan exploration of moon, I understand, but we have not looked at it that manner, so I won't be able to specifically give an answer on the moon mission, and I will hand over for the second part.
Joey, your question is specifically cooperation with China on the moon. I will expand your question. Cooperation with China. That's up to China. There has to be an openness there. And that has not been forthcoming. Now, good little glimpses. We have done deconfliction with regard to activities in and around Mars. And I would hope that on occasions like that, we would continue to have this. But as most of the people, I think, observing would see, that there's not a lot of transparency with regard to the Chinese space program vis-a-vis the U.S.
Thank you both. We'll go to our next question here. Sir in the back.
Hello, Thorsten Krieg, Spacewatch Global. The question to the ESA member states representatives. We have the ministerial ahead of us, a big thing. Joseph is going or traveling through Europe, I think, on a daily basis right now. So, and we have the occasion of the IAC here in Europe, in the center of Europe. So how are you using this opportunity to engage with the politicians? And second part of the question, what happens thereafter to the international cooperation? Is there any impact? That's to start with.
Oh, thank you. As you probably notice, it's very busy times here in Europe. Indeed, we are in a very intense phase of defining the elements of our program proposals to ensure countries' interests. They are optional programs. That means countries can or cannot fund. So meaning that we have a lot of negotiations ongoing to ensure good subscriptions. So yes, a lot of interactions are happening, but maybe I should also mention that there's a press conference planned on Monday, I think it is around lunchtime, specifically focusing on the CB22 preparation, so everyone is cordially invited to also go there and get a bit more details. There's one actually on applications, another one on exploration, so there are different themes, also astronauts being there on Wednesday. So please join us for those conferences to get some more depth or in-depth details on it. Let me just say that this is really the member states who are the ones who are defining back home their contributions and their roles and leadership roles or contribution roles in the various programs. Of course, we bring it all together, make sure that it's all coherent, it all makes sense, and at the end of the day is a unique program. And yes, we have very intense coordinations, discussions at political level, with industry, with various stakeholders, with scientists, with users, with the people, to really make sure that this package is around. It's not an easy exercise, I can tell you, because I'm somehow in the midst of it, but I have to say our member states are tremendous. We just had one of these meetings last week, very constructive, very successful, but we go in every single week with different activities and consultations, actually every single day, but we have some more formal processes, and this is really very intense. So of course we all hope that despite the circumstances, as I mentioned before, that this importance of space is recognized by the finance minister, because that's at the end of the day the one who is providing the funding. For this, if you can help us in giving the right message in this direction, I would be really appreciative and grateful.
President Baptiste, would you like to add on that question? Because I believe the question was also for the member states as well. Okay.
Well, it's difficult for me to answer for all member states, so I will mostly focus on the French side, but the answers has been partially given this morning by the Prime Minister. Basically, she said that the total budget for dedicated to space in France will increase of something around 25%, up to 9 billion over the next 9 billions, billions, yes. 9 billions over the next 3 years, so which is a very good news. And then after we have to decide, and we are working on this topic, which fraction of this 10 billion is dedicated to ESA, and which part of it is dedicated to other kind of programs, either defense program or also bilateral programs that we might have with NASA or with other nations, including China. We still have some scientific program with China. I'm not sure that we will start new ones, but we have existing ones. And so this is the current work we are doing.
President Campbell, I believe you wanted to add as well.
Thank you so much. Canada has a special relationship with ESA, and we will be at the ministerial as a cooperating state. And I'll echo what some of my colleagues said. Space is expensive, it's difficult, and we're best at it when we collaborate. And given what we want to accomplish, going into deep space, the moon, Mars, and beyond, we need to do it together. We need to share science, share technology, collaborate, and offer space as a solution to some of the serious problems we have on Earth. Climate change, food security, conflicts. Space can help us solve some of those major issues. And it's an exciting time for humanity. Webb has showed us the way, it's showed us the wonders of what there is to explore. So we need to get at it. There's an urgency around all of this. Thank you.
Certainly. Next question in the crowd. We're going to keep things moving along. Jacket?
Vincent with Cislunar Experience. Question really to all the different agencies up here. As we expand more into cislunar space and onto the moon, what level of collaboration on materials is there going on between these different nations here on creating standards, for example, of power conversion up on the moon? We came from the US and it's 110 versus 220. We'd probably like to not have a little converter on the moon wall. Just want to see it exists, at least for power conversions. What are the thoughts for lunar expansion? Thank you.
That's part of the interoperability that I talked about earlier in the earlier session. That has to be approached. And that's part of, by the way, the Artemis Accords. And some number of nations have already signed the Artemis Accords, and we expect more. And they set up standards, just like the one that you mentioned.
Maybe I add another example. Okay, you talk about the plugs in the wall and the moon wall, but navigation communication will be crucial. You need them on Earth. They need to be interoperable between the US, Japan, India, Canada, and Europe and different countries. And yes, the same interoperability you also need on the moon, because robots, astronauts, they all will need communication, their cell phones to call each other, and the station, maybe the gateway or other stations down on Earth. And yes, there needs to be interoperability, and we are working on this. Actually, we're putting together a common architecture for communication and navigation, and propose elements that contribute to it, and I think this is something that is happening as we speak, and an extremely important exercise. But you're absolutely right, we should avoid having different voltages on the moon and different places on the moon, and I think it's up to some of us, but also industry certainly, to make sure that we have a homogeneous approach.
Would others on the panel like to take the question, or do we want to move to the next one? All right, so right up here in the front.
Good afternoon, thank you. My name is Adele, and I'm a science columnist for Russian news website Life. I have two questions, if you don't mind. Two questions. The first question is for Mr. Nelson. It is about the orbiting the International Space Station finally, safely. Is it already clear how we are going, like you are going, or space agencies are going to deorbit, to safely deorbit the International Space Station? Will progress ships do that? Maybe Cygnus can do that. Doesn't have enough fuel. Maybe other ships can do that. And the second question is for Mr. Aschbacher, and it is about ExoMars. You mentioned ExoMars. Maybe you'll be so kind to explain what is the situation with the project currently. Are the rover and the platform are already separated? Is it painful to separate them? Thank you. Excuse me if they're painful.
We are still planning the deorbit of the International Space Station after 2030. However, the plans are underway. I have every reason to believe that our Russian partners on the International Space Station are going to cooperate in that deorbit.
On ExoMars, as everyone knows, ExoMars, the cooperation with Russia has been terminated. If you ask whether it's painful or not, it is very painful, I can tell you, for many of us, myself included, but also all the engineers across Europe who have been working on building up the spacecraft, various elements of the mission, which is of course the transfer vehicle, the lander, and the Rosalind Franklin rover itself. Actually, I should probably be coming back from Baikonur right now, because it was meant to be launched in September to Mars. So now we look at the new way forward. We have identified different options, and I cannot disclose yet what the way forward is, because these will be decisions that are made by member states at the ministerial conference. We have identified the packages and ways forward. I have to say that also the US was very supportive and helpful in helping us identifying some of these solutions. But how exactly this will be, you have to be patient for another 2 months until the ministerial, because there the decisions will be made.
Thank you both. Let's get to our next question here.
Thank you. I have a question for Chairman Sama. I'm sorry, I can't pronounce Charles' name. For India, are there any plans or any discussions to dock the Indian spacecraft at the International Space Station? Is it reachable from your launch sites? And for any of the current ISS members, how do you see the partnership moving forward once there's not an International Space Station, but a commercial operator? Would that still be done in a group format, or would you independently contract with the companies that are owning and operating the stations?
I look at it from the perspective of standardization. While we are building a space human craft, we look at the docking interfaces of the craft. Will have the identical standard dimensions and approaches, enabling it to dock to some of the international space stations that will come up in the future. So we are definitely looking at it and trying to configure in that direction only. So though we have not made any clear announcement or plans to engage like that, but we internally have looked at it from the perspective of standardization to enable such possibilities in the future. Did I answer the question fully?
Is it reachable from the Indian launch?
Yes, of course it is reachable, and we can reach there from the capability point of view.
And then for anybody else that's already on the ISS, for the members that are on the ISS that are thinking about what you're going to be doing in the future or when you're no longer.
So international cooperation is here to stay. We've exemplified it on the International Space Station over decades now, and you're seeing it again with the James Webb Space Telescope, Canada, Europe, NASA, and wonderful images that we're getting. You're seeing it as well on the Lunar Gateway. Again, a model of international collaboration, sharing technology, sharing expertise, pushing ourselves to go even further. And then, as Senator Nelson mentioned, the Artemis Accords, 21 countries have signed up for the reasons of wanting to have predictable rules, de-risking it, making sure there's interoperability. However, as you pointed out and we talked about on the panel, there are going to be many new options available to increase our access to space for human spaceflight and for science. And Canada is intent on availing ourselves of that, and it will mean new business arrangements. We welcome that. We've had industrial partners throughout our space exploration history, and that will increase as low Earth orbit becomes commercialized. There are more and more industrial and academic players entering. That means new arrangements, new opportunities. But international collaboration will always be a cornerstone of our success.
President Campbell, thank you. Just want to inform everybody that we have a little over 10 minutes remaining, so these are going to be our last final questions here as we work our way along. So if we can get a couple next few ones here.
Downstairs, we were laughing about the question which color the flag on the moon will be, which was an excellent question, I think. And to take it seriously, how can you prevent, also with militarization possibly in space, how can you prevent things becoming chaotic or, let's say, out of control on the moon? Because a lot of missions are targeted towards the same specific area, the South Pole. And what is your idea? I'm looking at NASA and ESA specifically on how to start conversations, for example, with Russia and China on this.
Thank you so much.
That is a work in progress, but I would point out, if you would look on pad 39B right now, a very powerful rocket that is about to launch to the moon. It not only has the NASA symbol, it also has the ESA symbol. So, are nations willing to come together in the future? To be determined.
It cannot be said more beautiful than what Bill was saying, but this is really The ESA logo is there for a good reason, because ESA member states, and we have 22 of those member states, plus very nice, strong cooperating states like Canada, plus 4 associate countries to ESA. They are together participating in this international endeavor, and this is certainly something that is expanding between NASA and ESA. I'm sure Japan, India and others are just as interested as we are in making sure that we have common rules of engagement, and you're absolutely right, they need to be established urgently so that we play with the same rules, along the same rules, to make sure that, that there is a good understanding of how we manage these resources also on the world.
I was seeing some nods here as well from Presidents Campbell and Yamakawa. I was wondering if you guys would want to chime in on that question as well.
I think Artemis Accords will answer most of the question. And I think the transparency is the most important thing to avoid conflict. So we would like to, using the press conference like this, we would like to say more about Artemis Accords. I think that's the best way to proceed.
All right, our next question, right here.
Hi, Enrique Carolina from Sutus in Spain. I want to ask just a recommendation, because this year, 500 years after the Spaniards make the travel around the world, we will create our Spanish space agency. May you make us any recommendation, please?
Brief recommendations.
Yes.
Brief recommendations to the Spanish. We'll move down the line here. If you would start us off here, Chairman. Oh, recommendations for the Spanish space agency. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
For you to travel around the globe. No, it's not for one nation alone. I think this is history repeating in itself. I think it is for the human race. See, the way you traveled 500 years back was exploring new lands and new opportunities. I think the journey continues for the human race to explore and continue. This is a narrative that we have been giving to the entire humanity, that we can't remain on this earth forever, and we need to travel beyond and explore. And I believe in the journey that you started, and many people taken over that, and they have been continuing those journey for the next many hundreds of years. I think this is something that we will continue to travel in the years to come. And it is the nature of the human society that we can't be stable and steady at one place, and we will continue to explore and find new worlds. And James Webb Telescope is something that gives us where the new worlds are there, and we will look for its outcome to see the new exosolar planets. Probably we will colonize and move one day.
Absolutely, go for it.
Well, thank you very much for your question. I think space is a place based on international collaboration. So please pursue international collaboration, cooperation. That's number one. Please invite young people, and please invite non-space industry to space industry. That's my answer.
Communicate the benefits of space to everyone, because it shouldn't be the realm of the esoteric or the science. We know, I mean, people at this conference understand the benefits of space in everyday life, but it's not well understood by the whole population. And if you want to get support and financing for what you're trying to do, those hard missions, it's important to spend time on communicating the benefits of space, inspiring young people.
As the GF visa, of course, it's a particular pleasure to talk to Spain as one of my very precious member states, and the fact that you are now establishing a space agency is good news, because this focalizes the energy and the activities. But I really like what you said at the beginning, 500 years ago. 500 years ago, it was under the Spanish king, as you know, that Christopher Columbus was exploring, was sailing out and exploring new barriers. He didn't know that he will discover a new continent, but this is what happens when you do exploration, that you go somewhere where you don't exactly know what you will encounter and what will happen out there. The next territory, the next continent, or the next domain we are discovering is now outer space with the moon and beyond. And this is a future economic zone, is a future zone of society. There is many activities that will be establishing. We are on day one of this new exploration step, and if you think 10, 20, 50, 100 years ahead, the world will look very different, and this new exploration of terra nowhere, as we call our exploration program in ESA, is certainly a very important element, a starting point of going there. So I'm particularly happy to hear this question from Spain. Thank you.
It's actually closing in on 510 years, because the first European to touch the shores of what is today the U.S. is then the governor of Puerto Rico, Ponce de Leon, and he named the land La Florida. In that spirit, I would say to the new shores that we're looking to, the new shores in space, viviendo al espacio.
Just to mention that Spain is already a space power. I mean, there is already a strong industry in space, in Spain. So the fact that you have a new agency is kind of on top of that, and Spain is not starting from zero or far away from that. So we, of course, we welcome very much the creation of the space agency. It allows not only to build cooperation inside ESA, but also with other countries. And it's also a way to provide also guidance and counsels to the government, and to try to help to build a well-based and space policy. So it's many good impacts.
Thank you all for sharing your perspective on that question.
Been working on the rocket to be human rated, and we were successful in creating additional tests and declaring those systems human rated. But the work on the crew module and the crew escape systems and all other intelligence required in the rocket will definitely take more time and more suborbital flight, and we are on that this year and coming year. While we do all this, we continue to work on newer technologies in various domains of launch vehicles, satellites, as well as robotic applications, and they are continuing to be done within the organization as well as industries and startups, and we continue to onboard them to create this capability in India. So this is the mandate and the outlook for this agency for the time being. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for this first round, and we see that you are using actively the Slido platform, so please keep on forwarding questions. But before we come to your questions, we would like to do another round of specific questions to our heads of agencies, and I would like to start with Lisa. You have mentioned already in general before, but maybe you can be more specific on how is Canada enabling industry to take its part in the lunar supply chain?
Thank you so much, Christian. So as we plan for humanity's return to the moon, there is huge potential for Canadian entrepreneurs and scientists to advance lunar science and technology. We analyze our space sector every year to take the pulse, see how they're growing, and they were incredibly resilient through the pandemic. They're very export-oriented, a lot of small and medium-sized businesses, and some increasingly larger ones. We created the Lunar Exploration Accelerator Program that funds commercialization of innovative ideas, and so we see that bearing fruit, huge interest, and it's already preparing us to go to the moon, Mars, and beyond. As part of this, I mentioned earlier, we're proud to be launching our first ever lunar rover. The rover will explore the moon's south pole, study its geology, and also identify areas containing ice. We'll test how these components can work together to overcome the significant challenge of surviving a frigid night on the moon. This lunar rover mission builds on our expertise in previous lunar rover technology projects. And the result of these efforts, we believe, will improve life for everyone in space and on Earth, also putting us at the forefront of space innovation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lisa. My question goes now to Mr. Sommernath from ISRO. The government of India has announced reforms in the space sector. You have been talking about that, with an intention of more private participation in space activities. So how do you see the Indian private space industry developing? Are you pleased with the start? Is it going well? What incentives will you use?
Yeah, I think these are exciting times in working with young people. Really, those startups in India that have been working in this domain for the last 5 years, seeing the enthusiasm of this younger generation, the government of India decided that this area must be one of that must be promoted with the agency support. So we created the institution of InSpace, primarily to work with them and also to handhold them using the knowledge and technology available within the space agency, and also to enable them to use our laboratories and spaces for them to do research and development and testing, and also to create those ecosystem in outside ISRO. I think this is very, very important. And we would like to see them grow in different domains. Of course, we see them to work in rockets, satellite building, applications, and we see much of the business opportunities are in the applications, and we see that as a domain which need to be promoted very much. But we are not ignoring those domains of rocket building as well. We know it's a very challenging domain, and success and reaching some goals are very difficult. But the enthusiasm of the young people are really encouraging, and they have built recently one of the first ever 3D printed rocket engine, and they have successfully tested it in private ecosystem and created the entire liquid engine development ecosystem in one of the laboratory, which is a very exciting thing to see to happen in India. We are also seeing that they are able to build scientific instruments, observational systems for cameras, radar instruments for small satellite platforms, and they are able to offer as a satellite bus for users in India. And we would like to make sure that the country or the government becomes an anchor customer for them to become successful. And we see that through this enabling mechanism of InSpace, this activity will grow bigger. And we have a new chairman, Dr. Pavan Goenka, who has come on board with our agency to handle this activity with great expertise and experience in industry. And he will be spearheading this activity to handhold these young people and startups, and also create a startup ecosystem throughout the country. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sommernath. I would like to address my next question to Josef Aschbacher. There's been a lot of talk about the accelerators over the last year. Where do they currently stand? And can we look forward to them being covered in the 2020 ministerial coming up in November?
No, thank you, Christian. So where do we stand with the accelerators? Maybe before I explain where we stand, just one quick word of what they are. Many of you, of course, in Europe know, because you have been involved in shaping them and defining them. The accelerators is a new concept of how we would like to bring space, I would say, beyond the more classical way of funding and defining space projects, but really making sure that we go very deep in addressing the main concerns of people, which are climate change, rapid and resilient crisis response, protecting our assets in space, and also engaging those communities in space programs or space projects. Take an example of the decarbonization of the economy, which is in everyone's mind. Every country or most countries have very clear targets of decarbonizing the economy by, say, 2050. That means converting one way of using fossil fuels into more sustainable ones, of traffic into more sustainable ways of traffic in agriculture, changing agricultural practices and so on. So there are many aspects where politicians are very concerned of how to decarbonize the economy, and Europe certainly is extremely engaged on this at the level of the European Union, of the member states and the individual countries. So what we want to do is to help building through these accelerators how this can be done, to engage those communities, public or private, who deal with the decarbonization of the economy as one example, and engage them in space programs. So what we do is, I've explained before that we are preparing for a ministerial conference where typically with the member states we make a proposal, they are funded and they are being implemented. The accelerators will build on building blocks from different partners, and they can be national institutions, they can be private entities, companies who are working in decarbonization, managers who are managing decarbonization funds or climate change funds, and really say, I have a need here in order to protect my coastlines or my farming community or protect the forest, and that's where I think space can play a role, and I want to be part of this wider setup in a more looser way of putting an ambitious program together through these building blocks. So where do we stand? And that's exactly the question. This concept has been agreed, endorsed by our member states at the Matosinhos conference we had last year, and again reiterated at the Space Summit in February. I've got the mandate to now work on them. The first one to work on is on Space for Green Future, which aims at decarbonization as mentioned before, and really build up contributions, governance, and of course the content and the architecture of this project. So this is happening right now. You may not hear so much about this because it is very exciting, and I want to avoid that all the excitement jumps on the accelerators while preparing a ministerial conference where of course we have very concrete proposals and programs on the table and need to focalize the energy and the funding on the ministerial conference. But we are preparing, we have established a team in-house in ESA of about 5-7 people. They are now starting to put the main rules of engagement together, and then after the ministerial, immediately we will work with partners to build up these building blocks. First define the governance under which rules you participate, and then collect these contributions. And this is not only European, this is a global affair, a global undertaking, so I really would like to invite all of you who have an interest to contact us, myself or my colleagues. This will be something that I really would like to reinforce with quite some energy after the ministerial, but until November our mind is really focused on getting the ministerial right. Thank you.
Thank you, Jürgen. Let me now ask the next question to Mr. Yamakawa. What are the plans of JAXA's Earth observation satellites and programs?
So thank you very much for the question. I talked about the H3 rocket, which we are currently developing, and our plan is to launch our next Earth observation satellite using a test flight of the H3 rocket. We call it ALOS-3, which means Advanced Land Observing Satellite, and it's a excuse me. And also using the next launch of the H3, we will launch ALOS-4 observing satellites, and those satellites are equipped with optical sensor and also radar sensors with more advanced capability. Thank you very much. And using those advanced capability of Earth observation, we would like to further use those satellites data for example, disaster monitoring, disaster response, and also we would like to use those data for our daily life, and also to contribute to global issues like climate change. So right now we are operating 6 Earth observing satellites, as I said, optical, radar, greenhouse gas, and so many others. But we'd like to add 2 more in the coming years to contribute to our daily life. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Yamakawa. Next question is for Bill Nelson. what is NASA doing to ensure the safe, peaceful, and transparent use of space? Broad question.
We have a real challenge in the future. We've got to figure out some kind of regulatory system with all of the commercial activities coming into space. All of this, as far as us international nations have to agree to a set of standards by which we are going to operate. Number one ought to be that we go in peace among our civilian programs, that we have interoperability so we can help each other out in times of trouble. That in fact we would come to the aid of one of our collaborating nations when we are in time of trouble, that we are transparent in what we do as we go forward and venture outward in this exploration of space. When you throw in the commercial part, it brings added dimensions. Take, for example, we hope by 2030 that we can deorbit the International Space Station and rely on other nations' space stations and commercial space stations. And so, what kind of standards are we going to insist as governments of the commercial activities? And then as we venture further on out to the moon, to Mars, we settle there. What are the standards that we're going to operate? Not only internationally, but also commercially. As we go out to asteroids and mine perhaps precious minerals, we've got to face the fact that we've got to have some frame of reference in which to do that. So it's going to be a very exciting future because of the advance of technology and the advance of the human desire in each one of us to explore and at the same time to all get along as we do this.
Thank you very much, Senator Nelson. We have about 30 minutes left, and we have really an enormous amount of questions. Some of them we have to group because they are quite similar, but this is of course also due to this really large audience here in the room. So we have some short questions for the panel, which are really directed to one country or to one participant, and then we have some broader questions. So we're going to mix them a little bit up, and I'm going to start. And that is a question for ISRO. What is the status of the Indian crewed spacecraft? Will it be possible for astronauts from other countries to participate in Indian crewed missions?
Really an interesting question. Yeah. First, we have to prove that it is okay for Indians. So that we are on that job first. So our program today, the Gaganyaan program, is intended to prove the capability demonstration. And beyond that, what we should do is yet to be decided and announced. So I am not going to speak about that. Of course, the possibility of ensuring the standards, as Senator Nelson mentioned, is one of the important issues when you talk about human crafts. And we are definitely looking at how to standardize those interfaces for possible working with other agencies in the future. I think this is definitely there. So that definitely opens possibilities of the nature of the question that you asked. Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. There are many questions that are alluding to the theme of this IAC, Space for All, and one question here that goes actually to all of you, one by one maybe. Following the theme of Space for All, how do you or your agency plan on incorporating emerging nations into the space sector in a meaningful way? Who would like to start on that? Josef?
Space for All, and I will be brief because there are five panelists here. Space for All for us really means at ESA and in Europe that we put at the disposal to humankind worldwide data that are essential for their daily life. I take Copernicus as one example. We are having a fleet of satellites in orbit measuring all elements of our planet for agriculture, for disaster management, for climate monitoring, and many information that you require for daily life. We provide this data, about 300 terabytes per day, to the global community. It's one of the largest data dissemination systems we've put together in order to do that. And the data are free of charge for every single person on this planet of any place in the world, typically within 3 hours depending on the satellite, but as soon as the acquisition is done. So this is really a service that Europe collectively puts at the disposal of all, literally, Space for All, as is the theme of this conference.
Thank you, Joseph. Lisa, I know that the Canadian Space Agency was actively participating in our latest edition of the IF Global Conference on Space for Emerging Countries. How does the Canadian Space Agency embrace emerging countries?
So similarly to what Josef said, we've seen the benefits of space for everyone, and that shouldn't be for only some countries. So it's incumbent, I think, on any country that has space capabilities to share those. Share the knowledge, share the technology, make the science open. In Canada, we just launched an Earth observation strategy, and the cornerstone of that is to make as much data accessible to everyone as possible. We know it stimulates innovation, new business models, and that it's very useful to countries as well. So that's a big piece of what we want to do, is to bring more countries, more individuals, more companies into the space community globally.
Yes,
well, thank you very much for your great question. I'd like to talk about the capacity building for alleged emerging nations, and I'm going to talk about the framework using the Japanese experiment module of the International Space Station, KIBO. And we're using that KIBO's function to release CubeSats from the International Space Station, and in collaboration with the United Nations and also with other organizations to provide the opportunities for emerging nations to actually develop their own CubeSats and deploy, providing the deployment opportunities from the International Space Stations. For example, last month, the Japanese government hosted a TICAT meeting in Africa, and we already released 6 African CubeSats in the past, and we will release 2 more in the near future. So that kind of activity is really contributing to capacity building of emerging nations. That's one example.
So, thank you very much. So, I think this is a question for Senator Nelson. What year would be realistic to have a permanent outpost on the moon?
If it's helpful with regard to going to Mars and further out, then it's a possibility. It may not be permanent in the sense of 365 days a year, but it could certainly be for extended periods of time in order to learn how to exist in a very hostile environment. The big difference is the moon is only 3 or 4 days away. Mars, 8 months or so, unless we improve the propulsion and can get there in 2 or 3 months. And that makes it a lot easier when you consider the alignment of all the planets about getting home. So I think we're going to learn as we go to the moon. We're going to figure out, we're working on a magic potion right now that we will mix with lunar dust, regolith, and it'll be a concrete launch and landing pad. It'll be building blocks for a structure. So there's a lot we can learn on the moon as we get ready to go the real long distance to Mars and then further out.
Thank you very much. We have a question for yeah, we have a question for Josef Aschbacher, for ESA. Do other agencies have plans to follow ESA in developing, well, actually, it's not everybody. Do other agencies have plans to follow ESA in developing their own para-astronaut feasibility project? Maybe you could just explain in 1 second.
Yeah. What is the para-astronaut project? As part of the call about a year ago, when we called for astronaut candidates, we also launched at the same time a call for para-astronauts being astronauts with a physical handicap, of course being fit mentally and to do an astronaut's job, and this is a very demanding job, as you can imagine, but having a physical handicap. This can be of different types, and we gave some possibilities what this could be, but we left it basically open for people to really apply. And it was very encouraging, the feedback we got. We got quite a large number of applications from people with a physical handicap who want to become an astronaut. So we are now, and this is part of the astronaut selection which I mentioned before, we will select para-astronaut candidates because there may need to be some work done in order to see what adjustments may need to be made in the spacecraft, in the capsule, or on the space station to cater for this handicap they have. But this is ongoing. The announcement will be done together with the other astronaut announcements in November this year, and then we will of course see what next steps we will take in order to get them into space. But yes, I'm very committed. ESA is a very diverse agency. We are fostering diversity of all senses, not only gender, but also other capabilities, and para-astronauts or people with a physical handicap is part of that. Very exciting project, and I'm really looking forward to the next steps in this project.
I think the question was also to other agencies, whether there are any plans to follow this example. Lisa?
We're going to be in a race for talent to work in space, not only astronaut corps and professionally trained astronauts, but everyone in space. And we need to increase the diversity of people who we hire. So I admire what ESA has done. I think it's the right thing, and I hope that many countries, including my own, will follow suit, not just for our astronauts, but for across the capabilities that we need to get to space. Whether it's in finance, engineering, arts, project management, we need to make sure that it represents the populations who we serve. Senator Nelson.
Diversity, equity, and inclusion is a major part of NASA's thrust into space. And that's why we have said, as was mentioned here earlier, that the first landing on the moon after a half a century will be the first woman and the next man, and along those landings will also be the first person of color from the U.S. With regard to, I could really commend you, Joseph, on looking for astronauts that might have a physical handicap. There would have to be adjustments. As you know, in 0G, my first experience in 0G, I wanted to get from here to there, and I did this. And that doesn't help you at all. So you learn that you push or pull yourself. And often how you steady yourself are foot loops, so that you get your feet in foot loops, and then you've got your hands free and you can stabilize yourself. With whatever the particular physical handicap is, would bring a new challenge, but certainly not one that can not be overcome. So it's, as a matter of fact, there would be a freeing experience for some physical handicaps in zero-G. But the primary thing is safety. Don't forget that. And that's why we scrubbed the first time on that big rocket on pad 39B. We scrubbed the second time. We're hoping to launch, if the tanking test works next Wednesday. We're hoping to launch on the 27th. This is a test flight. We're going to stress it and test it before we put humans on the top of it. And so safety, as we go into these different programs, safety is certainly one of the primary aspects.
Thank you very much. So, as we... Okay, please, I should go ahead.
So thank you very much. I also admire ESA's policy or direction in terms of the astronaut diversity. And JAXA is also currently selecting new JAXA astronauts especially for the Artemis program. But I can say nothing about that because right now we're in the selection process, so I stopped telling something about that. But as Lisa pointed out, diversity is quite important, not only for astronauts, but also for everybody, space community. So that's what I think right now. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So we have a very large young generation here at this Congress. Approximately 45% of participants are below 35. And so there's a question from the young generation. What is, in your opinion, the support of student research groups working on high-level space technology? How can you foster that? Maybe we start with Mr. Sommermann.
Yeah, I am seeing this phenomenon really good. And I'm really happy to see large number of participation of young people, space generation now, the next generation of people who are interested in space technology and applications, a really welcome thing. To enable them to do that, we need to create a certain ecosystem in every country, under every agency. The first and foremost is all of them come with starry eyes and great expectations and enthusiasm, but then really to get into space, then you need to be aware of the opportunities, specifically the outcome that you are going to derive out of your activities. For example, you get into an application, then you need to show the downline where you are leading to in terms of the business outcome, whether it will be sustainable over a long period of time. So it requires certain hand-holding to direct them to the market and what exactly is a market. Second is on technology side, of course, they need support. Many of them come with great ideas, but then ideas to prototyping and then doing something really useful requires great painful effort. And here the experience of some of the previous generation of people who can help them to mentor them. So the mentoring of the younger people by a previous generation is very essential. And many of them don't find those avenues or the platforms where this mentoring can actually take place. And I'm very happy that some of those initiatives in ESA, I'm seeing that, and many other agencies, there is a mentoring ecosystem that you are developing, how to put people in front, whether they can come and then connect with that. So the third part of it is funding. Okay, for young people, there is a lot of ideas, but then to convert them that you need money, and then sourcing that, and then with minimizing the risks is another important thing. And here we continue to tell big players, companies, who who have already invested in space and they have created a name for themselves, please contribute to this cause and then support these young people. Though there may be smaller companies who could be your threat at later point of time, but this is important that you handhold them, support them through seed funding opportunities and not take over them immediately. Allow them to grow, to show where they are going to. I think these three things if you do, I believe that younger people will definitely show there are better ways of doing space than what we old generation people do.
Lisa, do you have a microphone? No.
This is a wonderful question and a really exciting one. More than ever before, the cost to enter space has come down and it's much more accessible. And so the short story I'll tell you is this. In Canada, like many other agencies, we work hard to fund universities and give students real hands-on experience with, for example, a CubeSat program, which we've just launched the next iteration of it. So students get to build and design their own satellites that are launched into space and conduct real science. And many of those students go on to form businesses and stay in their own communities across Canada. And recently, I was traveling internationally and heard from another country that they were very interested in one of these small Canadian companies, and we could trace it back to funding that we gave and the studies that student did and the business that they then funded. And there are many, many stories like this. It's very exciting. So I'll echo what my colleague said. It's access to technology, support during it, and real hands-on experience, and then helping with funding. And magic happens. Thank you.
We are no longer the Apollo generation. And yet the Apollo generation did such phenomenal things in education, in science, technology, engineering, mathematics, the ripples across the globe. We are now the Artemis generation. We're going back to the moon and on to Mars. And out of that is going to come a revolution of new technologies, all of which is going to come out of the younger generation.
Thank you very much. There is great enthusiasm about the Artemis missions, especially the human flights coming up, not only in the US, all over the world, also in Europe. And we have a very concrete question here. Will the given the European contribution in the form of the ESM to Orion, will there be European astronauts on Artemis missions? I would like to address the question.
The answer is yes.
Yeah, I thought that there would be an answer.
No, the answer is yes, because we have an agreement between NASA and ESA on flying based on our contributions which we give to the Artemis program, the Gateway through ESPRI, IHARP, of course the ESMs and many other corporations. So we have 3 flights guaranteed. 2 of them are already allocated, 1 is still to be allocated, and of course